Imagine for the moment the abolition of all privately owned property, the forced relocation to specified megacities throughout the United States, being told the type of car you can drive, with limitations on where and when you can travel, how many children you're allowed to have, and how your child will be educated. The redistribution of America's wealth, stripping the rights of the individual into the collective. The forced sacrifice of one for the good of the many. Over half the United States to be off limits, deindustrializing our society as we know it. And all under the cover of sustainable development. A global plan to control the land, the water, and the resources beneath our soil. More than 178 nations adopted this as official policy in 1992. Did you know you were part of the plan? This is Agenda 21. The moment that the idea is admitted into society that property is not as sacred as the laws of God, and that there is not a force of law and public justice to protect it, anarchy and tyranny commence. Property must be sacred, or liberty cannot exist. John Adams. To understand Agenda 21, it's important to outline how and why the environmental movement has been co-opted into an economic and social nightmare. In 1987, over 1,600 delegates from 62 countries convened in Denver, Colorado, to address global environmental concerns. This meeting, known as the Fourth World Wilderness Congress, included the elite bankers of the world. London's Edmund de Rothschild, Chase Manhattan's David Rockefeller, and Michael Sweatman of the Royal Bank of Canada. Also in attendance were U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, James Baker, former Prime Minister of Norway and Socialist, Gro Harlem Brundtland, and lastly, UN Secretary General Maurice Strong. The meetings called for the integration of economics and environment, which would ultimately be managed by a New World Conservation Bank. This bank would lend money to third world nations, knowing the borrowing nation couldn't repay the debt. The borrowing nation would then in turn use its wilderness areas as collateral. When the country inevitably defaults on the loan, it loses its natural resources to the Conservation Bank. The best part of this scheme is that the taxpayer would be on the hook for funding the bank.
One of the most important initiatives that is open here for your consideration is that of the Conservation Banking Program. As we mentioned this morning, we have as our chairman, fortunately, the person who really is the source of this very significant concept. So there is no better person. He epitomizes in his own life that positive synthesis between environment, conservation on the one hand, and economics on the other. And I'm just delighted to have this opportunity of introducing to you Edmund de Rothschild.
Rothschild goes on without any evidence to state that carbon dioxide is the cause of global warming, and that combating it needs taxpayer money. Thus, the need for the World Conservation Bank. He also makes the following absurd statement.
Perhaps it could be possible to utilize CO2, carbon dioxide, one of its main causes, to manufacture dry ice, to maintain the polar caps and the actual temperature of the ice there, and maintain their present temperature. But all these ideas and visions, some far-fetched, and above all, the continuation of this Congress needs money.
The proposed World Conservation Bank was successful and was later named the Global Environmental Facility, the GEF. In conjunction with the Wilderness Conference was the United Nations Brundtland Commission, headed by Gro Harlem Brundtland, Vice President of the World Socialist Party, who along with Maurice Strong introduced the concept of sustainable development in its publication Our Common Future. For the first time, the environment was intertwined with socialist goals of international redistribution of wealth. Poverty is a major cause and effect of global environmental problems. It is therefore futile to attempt to deal with environmental problems without a broader perspective that encompasses the factors underlying world poverty and international inequality. The report summarizes that certain nations are destroying the earth more than others, so it is necessary to transfer resources from those nations to less fortunate parts of the world. This is known as social justice, a phrase coined by philosopher Karl Marx, a term in which he used to justify communism in the 1800s. These two events intertwine the environmental movement with economics and social justice principles. Now all that was needed was a catalyst to introduce fear into the world's population. In 1991, the Club of Rome, an elite think tank with close ties to the UN and members such as David Rockefeller and Mikhail Gorbachev, released The First Global Revolution. The book goes on to state, "In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. In their totality and in their interactions, these phenomena do constitute a common threat which demands the solidarity of all peoples. But in designing them as the enemy, we fall into the trap about which we have already warned, namely, mistaking systems for causes. All these dangers are caused by human intervention, and it is only through changed attitudes and behavior that they can be overcome. The real enemy, then, is humanity itself." In the past, the Club of Rome has resorted to deceptive tactics in order to support their plans. In 1972, they wrote a report called Limits to Growth. The report stated that we would have reached an environmental holocaust by the year 2000 due to overpopulation. Support for their conclusions were results from a flawed computer model. One of the club's founders, Aurelio Peccei, confessed that the computer program had been written to give the desired results. Regardless of the club's legitimacy, the 1991 report was a success and installed fear into the hearts and mind of the world's population. It was now the perfect time to offer the solution to the invented problem, Agenda 21, the agenda for the 21st century. Agenda 21 is a comprehensive plan of action to be taken globally, nationally, and locally by organizations of the United Nations system, governments, and major groups in every area in which humans impact the environment. The United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, UNCED, also known as the Rio Earth Summit, was held in Rio de Janeiro in June 1992. Maurice Strong, chairman organizer of the conference, started off the conference with the following quote, "Current lifestyles and consumption patterns of the affluent middle class, involving high meat intake, use of fossil fuels, electrical appliances, home and workplace air conditioning, and suburban housing, are not sustainable." Strong states the following are not sustainable: private property, roads, highways, railroads, logging, harvesting, timber, power lines, fences, ski resorts, golf courses, industry, fossil fuels, fertilizers, pesticides, plows, agricultural equipment, dams, reservoirs, livestock. Let me reiterate, all of these things are to be limited or abolished under Agenda 21. The size of the family is also unsustainable. Here is Maurice Strong in a 1972 BBC interview.
Licenses to have babies, something that I got in trouble for some years ago for suggesting, even in Canada, that this might be necessary at some point, or at least some restriction on the right to have a child.
This was the same man who attended the Fourth Wilderness Congress and played a key role in the Brundtland Report. So with ties to the elite banks and Brundtland's social justice initiative, this was the perfect storm. Remember the World Conservation Bank of his friend Edmund de Rothschild? Strong officially brought it out of the World Bank and under the United Nations. Now 179 governments are paying to it and are present on the board of the bank. Strong is also on record as saying, "It is simply not feasible for sovereignty to be exercised unilaterally by individual nation-states, however powerful. It is a principle which will yield only slowly and reluctantly to the imperatives of global environment cooperation." His most egregious statement, "Isn't it the only hope for the planet that the industrialized civilizations collapse? Isn't it our responsibility to bring that about?" And lastly, in 2005, during investigations into the UN's Oil for Food program, evidence procured by federal investigators show that in 1997, Strong had endorsed a check for almost $1 million made out to a Mr. M. Strong, issued by a Jordanian bank. While Strong was never convicted, he immediately stepped down from his UN post. It's important to expose these people for who they are. This is what the United States will look like if Agenda 21 is fully implemented. The Wildlands Project was first proposed by Dave Foreman of Earth's First in 1991. The plan is to remove humans and destroy all infrastructure such as buildings, cars, and roads in over 50% of the United States, essentially putting nature above man. The red and yellow areas, which should make up most of the map, are to be off limits to humans. The human settlement areas are shown in black, where we're to be stacked and packed in cities. Gone are the days of moving out to the suburbs, having a nice little house with a white picket fence. Urban sprawl is now demonized, forcing residents to stay within city limits. Our private property and resources will now be controlled and regulated by central government. Mr. Foreman stated, "My three main goals would be to reduce human population to about 100 million worldwide, destroy the industrial infrastructure, and see wilderness with its full complement of species returning throughout the world. I wonder where the other 6.9 billion people will go." He goes on to say, "It is not enough to preserve the roadless, undeveloped country remaining. We must recreate wilderness in large regions, move out the cars and civilized people, dismantle the roads and dams, reclaim the plowed land and clear cuts, reintroduce extirpated species." Before the meetings ended, President George H.W. Bush signed on to Agenda 21 with the pledge to adopt the goals of the document. However, since this was a soft treaty, the agenda was not enforceable. The same year, California Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi submitted H.R. 353 and H.R. 166 to implement Agenda 21, but both bills failed in the Senate. It wasn't until 6 months after President Bill Clinton was inaugurated, Executive Order 12852 was signed, created the President's Council on Sustainable Development, and made it official U.S. policy. It's no coincidence that Gro Harlem Brundtland, the head of the aforementioned Brundtland Commission, is a close personal friend of Hillary Clinton.
And as a former environment minister, a longtime advocate for sustainable development, and most recently as a United Nations Special Envoy for Climate Change, you helped set the stage for intensive diplomatic and scientific work being done on this issue today. The impact of climate change affects all of us, and as you've said, we must act together if we're going to successfully address this global challenge.
We are fast approaching the stage of the ultimate inversion, the state where the government is free to do anything it pleases, while the citizens may only act by permission, which is the stage of the darkest periods of human history, the stage of rule by brute force. Ayn Rand. The President's Council on Sustainable Development's purpose was to translate the recommendations set forth in Agenda 21 into public policy executed by the federal government. The PCSD created the American version of Agenda 21 called Sustainable America, a New Consensus. This contained 150 policies taken directly from Agenda 21. It laid the groundwork for expanding government's power to control land use, natural resources, and human activity. A year after the President's Council on Sustainable Development was created, the International Code Council, a non-governmental organization, was formed. 50 states in the District of Columbia have adopted the I-codes at the state or jurisdictional level. This council provided 15 elaborate and long-winded codes to government. Rarely anyone but government planning departments and code enforcers review these codes because there is so much to read. These codes bring draconian restrictions on individual freedom because the rights of the community take precedent over the rights of the individual. Here are just a few extreme examples of how these building codes have affected property owners. Anna Miles told a citizens group in Coleman, Alabama that environmental police visited her 86-year-old aunt and told her that a small patch of tomato plants in her backyard was a code violation that could result in a fine of $150 per day. In Orem, Utah, code enforcement is the job of the neighborhood preservation officers. Betty Perry, a senior citizen who lives in Orem, was handcuffed and hauled to jail by these officers for violating a code. Her crime was failure to water her lawn. Rondell Keith Jervis of Corbin, Kentucky, failed to mow his lawn to the liking of a code enforcement officer and received a $100 fine. After a verbal altercation between Jervis and the code enforcer, his fine was increased to a whopping $2,250, and he was additionally charged with third-degree terroristic threatening. Now the city may take a lien out on Jervis's property to collect the fine plus interest, foreclose the lien, and sell the property. In Clarkston, Georgia, Steve Miller faces up to $5,000 in fines because of his organic garden, which he had been growing for over 15 years. He sold his goods to the local community and farmers, who were in disbelief over this ridiculous charge. In Eagle Point, Oregon, a man received a $1,500 fine and served a 30-day jail sentence after he built 3 reservoirs on his property to collect rainwater, which was a violation of the state's law, which says all water is publicly owned. Although the owner had permits approved to do this, the state retracted its decision and threw him in jail. Through these examples, you can see how the regulations and restrictions outlined in the ICC codes bring ironclad control over property use and infringe on property rights. A key player in the local implementation of Agenda 21 is the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives, which is now known as ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability. ICLEI was founded in 1990 by the United Nations as a non-governmental organization. Because of ICLEI's lack of transparency, many are unaware that they contributed in the writing of Agenda 21 at the UN level. At the next phase, ICLEI prepared the local Agenda 21, which details how government can take control of land and natural resources, as well as control and monitor water use, land use, energy use, health, education, technology, and transportation. It also calls for a new communitarian system of governance to be implemented locally. Communitarianism is the belief that individual sovereignty must be balanced against the needs of the global collective. The rights of the community would eventually usurp individual rights and sovereignty defined under our Constitution. In speaking about Agenda 21, Harvey Reuven, Vice President of ICLEI, said, "Individual rights will have to take a back seat to the collective." Just to give you an idea of how this system works, you can take a look at the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. ICLEI uses soft language like smart growth, consensus, visioning, sustainable, bikeable, livable, walkable, so no one will be alarmed or even pay attention to what their true intentions are. Although Agenda 21 is a non-binding agreement which the United States was signed up for in 1992, a way around that is through the use of ICLEI. Their goal is to make your local government agree to incorporate Agenda 21 recommendations into local policy and comprehensive land use plans, therefore making it a binding agreement. Both unelected government employees and elected government officials are able to become members of ICLEI and pay membership fees to obtain recommendations for local policy, along with things like software and training. The problem with this relationship between your government and the UN-formed NGO, ICLEI, is that it is a direct violation under Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution, which states, "No state shall enter into any treaty, alliance, or confederation." This includes counties, cities, and other municipalities. Many private foundations and federal agencies that seek to profit financially and gain control from the implementation of Agenda 21 also directly fund the efforts of ICLEI. These include the David Rockefeller Fund, the Turner Foundation, the Boone Family Foundation, ESRI, the Meadows Foundation, Siemens, the World Bank, the Energy Foundation, the United States Department of State, the United States Department of Energy, the United States Environmental Protection Agency, and the list goes on. ICLEI is claiming over 1,300 members worldwide in over 600 cities in the United States. The most populous cities in the United States are ICLEI members, including New York, Chicago, San Francisco, Boston, Seattle, Portland, and Miami. ICLEI works behind the scenes in government, so in order for you to find out if your municipality is a member, you can look on their website. If you find that your local government is a member, it is crucial for you to tell your officials what Agenda 21 is and that they must cut ties with ICLEI before it's too late. Similar to ICLEI, there are thousands of other non-governmental organizations and stakeholder groups approved by the United Nations, who play a vital role in implementing the political agenda of the United Nations statewide and locally. These UN-established NGO groups also developed grant programs to encourage states, cities, and towns to implement sustainable development policy locally. Hundreds of communities all over the United States have received grants or assistance through the Federal Partnership for Sustainable Communities, such as Environmental Protection Agency, the Department for Housing and Urban Development, and the Department of Transportation. Grant money is the muscle behind the local implementation of Agenda 21. Public-private partnerships are an exclusive partnership between a public entity and a private entity that uses financial resources of the private sector to carry out the legal activities or functions of the public sector. PPPs are usually made up of corporations, foundations, universities, and non-governmental organizations. These partnerships destroy the free enterprise system as they are granted special privileges by the government, such as contracts, tax breaks, and subsidies, while non-participation companies are left out in the cold. In many cases, the PPP will have no liability in the buildings they produce, unlike companies in the free market. Profit trumps quality and service. To make matters worse, government will accept funding from these private interests whom seek to gain from the implementation of Agenda 21 and sustainable development within a community. This all too often leads to corruption, and ultimately the taxpayer will begin to find that they are no longer represented by their elected officials. This process can be very disheartening, especially when the members of a community voice their concerns about the issues with local Agenda 21 initiatives and fail to see their elected officials vote in their favor. This is a video which shows a city council meeting in San Carlos, California, where community members attempted to bring to light ICLEI's involvement in UN Agenda 21 and pleaded for their council members to cut ties with them.
All of these things seem like they sound so good. Sustainable development, green, vibrant, walkable, bikeable. You know, how could you be against that? But really, when you know about this plan, it is really very serious. And I urge you tonight to sever your relationship with ICLEI.
They're not part of this government. They're outside, coming from outside of our nation. And they don't have the best interests of Americans at heart.
What they're going for is 11 regions in North America, not states, not our 50 states, 11 regions. They will be appointing people to do the planning and the running and the operation of those regions through the United Nations.
I am patently against ICLEI and Agenda 21, and I urge the city, as a resident, to withdraw your membership.
Here is the Local Agenda Planning Guide, ICLEI. Local Agenda Planning Guide, ICLEI. If you open this up, it's from Maurice Strong. It talks about the United Nations. It talks about Agenda 21. This is it. You cannot deny that they are not connected. The document's right.
Even after listening to their pleas, all council members but one voted to continue contracts with ICLEI. Now you see how NGOs and PPPs can infiltrate and influence your government officials, leaving total disregard for any concerns of the taxpayers. UN Agenda 21 Sustainable Development is the action plan implemented worldwide to inventory and control all land, all water, all minerals, all plants, all animals, all construction, all means of production, all energy, all education, all information, and all human beings in the world. Rosa Corey, Behind the Green Mask. In 1993, Bill Clinton awarded the American Planning Association a $5 million grant to write a draft for land use legislation, which was to be provided to all municipalities. In 2002, the American Planning Association wrote Growing Smart Legislative Guidebook, which is the blueprint of statutes, laws, and ordinances for sustainable development. Copies of this guidebook can be found in all universities, colleges, and planning boards nationwide. This guidebook is used to indoctrinate planners nationwide to believe that smart growth is the best kind of growth. The preferred building structure under Agenda 21 is high-density mixed-use and transport-oriented development, also known as smart growth. Buildings within redevelopment zones must be redeveloped to meet the new mandates under the Comprehensive Plan, which is mixed use, with the first story usually being retail, and 2 or more stories of residential. Any existing buildings located within these redevelopment zones who do not meet these standards can be deemed as legal non-conforming or blight. Developing this type of building is extremely costly, which discourages future investment for property owners. Government has the power to take these blighted properties under eminent domain and against the will of the property owner, and give it or sell it to favored smart growth developers. While many small business owners are struggling to make ends meet and having their buildings deemed as blight, favored developers are given government subsidies and incentives to build low-income housing, condominiums, and high-density mixed-use buildings in these redevelopment zones. It will be a matter of time until whole cities are redeveloped as smart growth, and only few investors will see profit, leaving mom-and-pop shops a thing of the past. If you have noticed that your local government has much less general funds in their budget, they may have signed on to implementing sustainable development in your community. This in turn can lead to more potholes in your roads which aren't fixed, streetlights off, the downsizing of your police and fire departments, and even hospitals closing. This is all happening because your taxpayer money, which is supposed to be funding those departments as well as highway, road, and infrastructure maintenance, is being diverted towards investments in redevelopment zones and smart growth within your community. The goal is to have the entire population move into these stack 'em and pack 'em type cities where they can easily be monitored and controlled. While unemployment rates soar, taxes increase, and people are paying more for basic necessities like food and gas, it becomes the perfect storm for people to have no choice but to move out of their single-family homes and into low-income housing or apartments within smart growth areas. Conservation easements are the legal tool used to conserve land indefinitely, which transfers interest in the land and property rights to a second party. These easements are usually purchased by federal and state governments or by private land trusts whom often sell to government entities. These acquisitions allow the government to inventory and control massive amounts of land, which ultimately leads to the goals set forth in the Wildlands Project. These easements undoubtedly pose a future threat to our rural economy, culture, and private property ownership. On top of current EPA regulations, farmers will have to adhere to new strict regulations which enforce sustainable farming methods that restrict energy and water use in farming practices.
Farming operations are going to have a regulatory specialist to keep up with regulations to keep their farming operations in compliance.
I'm as concerned about our young people. Where is the next generation of agriculture going to come from if they're discouraged from even entering into it? And where is the next food providers in this country going to come from if that frustration is carried to the younger generation?
This ultimately will lead to higher costs and shortages, all under the guise of environmental protection and conservation. Another coffin nail in the UN Agenda 21 takeover is the installation of smart meters. These meters will eventually replace your old energy meters. Through the use of forced energy audits, government officials will determine what changes need to be made to your home in order to comply with the current greenhouse gas regulations. This can cost tens and thousands of dollars. If you cannot afford to make these changes and do not comply, you will be hit with a hefty fine. These smart meters are a part of this sustainable development. These meters contain RFID chips, which can keep track of the amount of power you are using, and also have the ability to control and ration your electricity, such as your heat, AC, or hot water. You will eventually be forced to buy new smart appliances with RFID chips in them as well. These appliances have the technology to communicate with the smart meter attached to your home, keep track of the energy you are using, and regulate it all at once. CIA Director David Petraeus announced that these new RFID appliances, smart meters, and cell phones, embedded with microprocessors, allow the CIA to remotely intercept and access every email, phone call, text message, chat, and even listen to the conversations you have within the privacy of your own home. Yes, Big Brother is not just watching you from above, but they are now able to spy on you in the privacy of your home. And if you do not want the smart meter technology put in your house, your power will be simply shut off. In Naperville, Illinois, one woman is arrested for resisting the smart meter installation, and her neighbor was arrested for videotaping the incident. The installers broke into the homeowner's yard and installed a smart meter against the owner's will. Some customers who have already opted to have smart meters installed claim since the installation their electricity bill had increased significantly, sometimes hundreds of dollars more. On top of the privacy and billing issues dealing with smart meters, they have also been reported to cause health issues in humans and animals. The effects of electromagnetic fields and radio frequency generated by smart meters, along with their communication with towers and networking systems, can potentially cause cancers, DNA damage in infants, and possibly other illnesses. Smart meters can violate already high FCC limits on human exposure to microwave radiation and are being installed even as people are developing electrosensitivity. There are also reports of smart meter interference with pacemakers and other implants. You would think that before these smart meters were even considered to be installed into people's homes, there would be studies done to show absolute proof that they do not cause any immediate or future health risks in humans and animals. You will most likely never hear the term Agenda 21 in your community. Even the President's Council on Sustainable Development denied being affiliated with UN Agenda 21, although they had clearly established support of Agenda 21 and its sustainable development proposals in 1993 following the UN's Earth Summit meeting in Rio. In the publication, The Future of Local Agenda 21 in the New Millennium, written by PCSD advisor J. Gary Lawrence, he said, quote, Participating in a UN-advocated planning process would very likely bring out many of the conspiracy-fixated groups and individuals in our society. This segment of our society who fear one world government and a UN invasion of the United States through which our individual freedom would be stripped away would actively work to defeat any elected official who joined the conspiracy by undertaking local Agenda 21. So we call our process something else, such as comprehensive planning, growth management, or smart growth. So if Agenda 21 is so great and we have nothing to worry about, why must they call it something else and at times even deny that it exists? What is there to hide? Agenda 21 spreads its tentacles from governments to federal and local authorities and right down to community groups. Chapter 28 of Agenda 21 specifically calls for each community to formulate its own local Agenda 21. In an attempt to get the community on board with Agenda 21 locally is through public meetings, most often called visioning or consensus meetings. At these meetings, you may think you have a chance to voice your opinion, but unfortunately the outcome of the meeting has already been predetermined by the people who called the meeting in the first place. In these meetings, a technique is used which is called the Delphi technique. This was developed by the RAND Corporation during the Cold War as a mind control technique. The goal of the Delphi technique is to lead a group of people to a predetermined outcome while keeping the illusion of being open to public input. Stakeholder councils, whom are made up of bureaucrats and local corporations, hold these meetings under the guise of receiving public opinion for the visioning process in regards to the sustainable development in your rural or urban community. If you speak up against this visioning for the future or don't like the choices you are given to answer their multiple choice questions, the meeting facilitators will put you down, stonewall you, call you crazy, and make you feel guilty for not wanting to preserve the environment. In order to defeat these attacks and show your community the truth about sustainable development, you must take control of the meeting from the stakeholders into your own hands. If you and the community members who attend these meetings simply go along with the ideas presented, the facilitators will report to your local government officials that everyone is on board with the plan. So don't get Delphied. Ask questions, bring up talking points, keep your cool, and when your questions are ignored or not given a straight answer, point that out. You are the resistance. If you think the promotion of Agenda 21 is only being done through PPPs, NGOs, local governments, and stakeholders, you are wrong. Under Chapter 25 in Agenda 21 it states, quote, "The involvement of today's youth in environment and development decision-making and in the implementation of programs is critical to the long-term success of Agenda 21. The U.S. Department of State already admitted that children are being taught sustainability in schools. They state, quote, "At the primary school level, school curricula have already been reviewed and revised, and at the secondary school level, the revision of school curricula is being undertaken currently to address environment and development as a cross-cutting issue." According to the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education, 677 colleges and universities, representing all 50 states and more than 6 million students, one-third of the national student body, have signed the American College and University President's Climate Challenge. From this, students must commit to create a plan to achieve carbon neutrality on campus and integrate sustainability throughout their curriculum. These statistics don't include the number of children and teens from kindergarten to 12th grade that are being taught sustainability, which the EPA says is one of the most ideal places to support sustainable programs.
And I see y'all are wearing little worlds there. Do y'all care about the world?
Yeah.
Y'all are good people, aren't you?
Yeah.
Do y'all think the United Nations is helping?
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's a great way to make world peace.
A great way to make world peace.
Mhm.
Because through global governance, we can knock out all the troublemakers.
Yes.
Is that what y'all been talking about?
Yeah, sort of. Yeah.
Well, that's great. I hope y'all have an enjoyable time.
Okay.
Another example of how your children are being indoctrinated and fearmongered can be found in the 1994 book Rescue Mission, Planet Earth, a children's edition of Agenda 21. This book represents a partnership between different regions of the world, between children and adults, and between the United Nations agencies. Inside includes UN propaganda like the following statement, quote, "We're 28 very different young people from 21 countries, but we have one thing in common. We're tired of seeing our beautiful planet polluted, tired of senseless wars, of the poor getting poorer day by day, of waiting for politicians to make decisions they should have made long, long ago." It goes on to say, quote, "Governments ask for partnership with kids, so they want our kids to help them take away our individual sovereignty and have us be enslaved under a one-world government? If you think that was bad, it gets worse. It goes on to say, quote, "The planet groans every time it registers another birth." Well, I think we can all agree that this isn't proper reading for anyone, especially a child. So be aware of this scam called sustainable development developed by the United Nations. It is affecting our great nation and the entire world for that matter, on every level. We all must come together, spread the word, and stop it before it's too late.